Hello everyone, this is Professor Pr.El Majdoubi. I teach English language, literature and culture at the Department of English Studies at the Faculty of Letters and Human Sciences of Mohammedia, University of Hassan II, Casablanca. Here, I will be giving you a series of lectures on literary movements. I hope you will enjoy them as much as I do. Thank you very much. Blessed be. English Studies, Literary Movements, S5, Professor El Majdoubi. Romanticism, 1798-1837. Romanticism was an intellectual, literary, cultural, and artistic movement in the late 18th century and early 19th century in Western Europe. Unlike the Enlightenment, which focused mainly on intellect, Romanticism focused on the individual and his inner world, emotions, feelings, instincts, imagination, intuition, inspiration, and idealism. Romanticism was a response to the scientific rationalism and classicism of the Age of Enlightenment. Romanticism fixated on nature as a pure source of infinite beauty and spiritual renewal. Romantic writers rejected the Enlightenment thinkers' assertion, according to which human reason can rationalize nature. Turning nature into science made no sense to Romantic writers. Romantic writers mystically looked at nature as something to be experienced, rather than something to be dissected. Here is a mesmerizing romantic landscape. Please take the time to contemplate it. The period of Romanticism witnessed tremendous social and political changes. Romanticism was a reaction to the aristocratic ideas of the Age of Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. The French and American revolutions fueled the Romantic movement in a more pronounced way. Romanticism celebrated the common man and valued the individual experience. Pioneers of the Romantic period sought to break away from the Enlightenment conventions and make way for experimentation. Romantic poets idealized women and embraced delicate melancholia. The emphasis on emotions and rhythm also extended to the composition of the music of the time and is perceptible in some iconic works by Weber, Beethoven, Schumann, and others. Ludwig van Beethoven is the emblematic musical figure in the transitional period between the classical and Romantic eras. Amongst the most illustrious figures of Romanticism were John Keats, William Wordsworth, Percy Bysshe Shelley, Mary Shelley, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, William Blake, and Lord Byron. William Wordsworth defined poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin from emotion, recollected in tranquility. Blank verse was the dominant rhyme scheme in the poetry of the Romantic age. At length did cross an albatross, through the fog it came, as if it had been a Christian soul. We hailed it in God's. Lines composed by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, in the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. Here are the most emblematic figures of Romanticism, namely John Keats, Percy Bysshe Shelley, William Wordsworth, Lord Byron, and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Lyrical Ballads, a collection of poems by William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, first published in 1798, ushered forth the Romantic period. Romanticism often used autobiographical material to inform literary works. Stylistically, Romantic poets emphasize the following literary devices: pathetic fallacy is the projection of human emotions onto nature. Personification is the attribution of human characteristics to something non-human. And this prayer I make, knowing that nature never did betray the heart that loved her. Lines composed by William Wordsworth. For I have learned to look on nature not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still sad music of humanity. Lines composed by William Wordsworth. Besides the exotic, Romantic writers investigated the supernatural and the occult in their work. Magic, spells, and superstition. Women such as Jane Austen, Charlotte Bronte, and Mary Shelley signed the most illustrious Romantic novels. These literary works originally bore male pen names. Below you can see Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte. The Romantics were interested in the supernatural and included it in their work. Gothic fiction thus emerged as a subset of Romanticism. Many Romantic novels depicted a character who lived at the edge of normal society. Romanticism saw the universe as organic, while Enlightenment thinkers viewed it from a systematic or mechanical perspective. An author qualified Romanticism as the profoundest cultural transformation in human history since the invention of the city. Follow the link to watch the educational video on Romanticism and answer the questions below. Question number 1. What are the fundamental principles of Romanticism according to the speaker? Question number 2. What did Romantic writers mean by untamed nature? Realism and Naturalism in 19th century literature. Realism is an artistic and literary movement that began in France in the mid-19th century. Realism rejected the false idealism and exaggerated sentimentality of Romanticism. Realism sought to portray life as it is. It contained no fantasy or supernatural elements. Realism accurately depicted nature, the human condition, and the common man. Social, economic, and political reforms fueled realism. In the 19th century, 3 revolutions took place: the Industrial Revolution, the Scientific Revolution, and the Moral Revolution. Amongst the key figures that shaped realism were Charles Darwin. He was the initiator of the evolutionary theory of natural selection. Karl Marx. He was the founder of communism. He advocated an equal distribution of wealth. Auguste Comte. He was the designer of positivism, a theory of fact-oriented science, according to William Taylor. With Darwin, Marx, and Comte, European societies challenged religious, political, and economic beliefs. Scientific principles informed the study of humans. Naturalism developed from realism. It maintained that all actions find their explanation in nature. From a naturalistic perspective, characters have free will. Larger forces, such as heredity and the social environment, condition their behavior. Determinism and survival are some of the most cherished themes of naturalist writers. Amongst the most illustrious realist writers were Henrik Ibsen from Norway, Anton Chekhov from Russia, George Eliot from England, Honoré de Balzac from France, William Dean Howells from America. In realistic fiction, the characters are ordinary people, leading ordinary lives. Subject matters are bold, and social values are challenged. In realistic fiction, the characters are engaging. The dialogue is credible. The setting is commonplace. The writer's tone is not preachy. The humor of language, characters, and situations is often used to break the tension. Thematic concerns included adultery, prostitution, racial prejudice, child abuse, drugs, sexual and psychological disorders, etc. The Victorian Age, 1832–1901. As a form of English realism, Victorianism covers the period between the passage of the first Reform Bill in 1832 and Queen Victoria's death in 1901. It is known for its strict conservatism as well as its profound social reforms. The Victorian Age fascinates scholars by its multiple facets, complexity, and paradoxes. During this era, England went from being an agricultural country to an industrialized one. Watch the following video. Compare the previous video with this one. The two videos made us discover American realism. Let us now consider British realism. Modernism from late 19th to mid-20th century. Modernism started around the early 1900s and continued until the early 1940s. A series of global conflicts that ruined Europe, mainly the First World War, 1914–1918, and the Second World War, 1939–1945, paved the way for modernism. As literature mirrors society, fragmentation made its way both conceptually and stylistically in literature and arts. Unlike realism, modernism was more focused on aesthetics than on societal issues. Free verse characterized the style of modernist poets. Other writing styles, such as stream of consciousness and multiplicity of perspectives, flourished. Emily Dickinson and Walt Whitman had a tremendous influence on early modernist writers. Many American modernist writers made their way to Paris. Experimentation was encouraged by modernist writers who tried new literary forms and styles. Some modernist writers became famous for their experimental works. Amongst them were the authors Virginia Woolf and James Joyce, and the poets Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot. Like realism, modernism has sometimes been interpreted as retaliation against the dual standards of Victorian morality. Amongst the other factors that led to the emergence of modernism was industrialization and its companion individualism, nihilism, and absurdism. Modernist literature is mainly characterized by memories and non-linear or non-chronological narratives. Modernists relied heavily on the findings of rational thinkers such as Charles Darwin, theory of evolution and natural selection, Sigmund Freud, theory of human mind, Karl Marx, theories of class inequality, and Friedrich Nietzsche, theory of epistemic perspectivism. Amongst the predominant themes were the interference of past and present, the pursuit of happiness, decadence, disillusionment, and insanity. Stylistically, flashbacks, multiple perspectives, symbolism, and so forth characterized modernist literature. Modernists refuted established religious, political, and social values. Consciousness and self-reflexivity were at the heart of modernist writers' preoccupations, as their focus was on the inner self. By using non-omniscient and unreliable narrators, modernists led readers to question their assumptions. Modernists considered that diverse perspectives are necessary to apprehend the subtleties of the world. Modernists believed that literature is not organically structured. Instead, they viewed it as a composition of a variety of materials. Modernist writers created a collage of styles by mixing images from the past with modern linguistic and thematic elements. Modernists used urban environments as backdrops for their stories. Urbanity as a way of life shaped the discourse of much of modernist literature. Modernism gave voice to marginalized writers who celebrated Black identity as much as female identity. Similarly, the post-colonial literary movement was born with activist figures such as Chinua Achebe. Listen to the podcast below, then answer the questions. What did you learn from the podcast? What were the defining features of modernist literature? Postmodernism, 1965 up to the present day. Postmodernism is an intellectual stance towards art, culture, and society. It represents a quest to surpass modernism. Its skeptical attitude challenges modernist epistemic and ideological assumptions about knowledge and reality. It emphasizes impressionism and subjectivity. It leans towards self-awareness and reflexivity. Postmodernism takes a clear-cut stance against claims of fixity and universality. Postmodernism dismantles the objectivity of truth, the stability of language, and the coherence of reality. It privileges hands-on experience over abstract principles. Postmodernism revisits essentialist categories such as class, race, and gender. These categories are considered social constructs rather than a biological reality. Deconstruction, a central concern of postmodernism, can be viewed as a critical analysis developed by French philosopher Jacques Derrida. Postmodern literature uses pastiche, which is a parody of past styles. Postmodernism is a mode of discourse, a free plain discursive space, while modernism is more related to the Enlightenment ideas. In other words, the context of postmodernism is discursive, textual, and that of modernism is ideational, anti-narrative, anti-form, anarchy, and immanence in postmodernism are alternatives to narrative, form, hierarchy, and transcendence in modernism. Modernism and postmodernism are not two distinct movements, but two poles of an experience. Postmodern works revolt against the universal norms of the Enlightenment and modernist approaches to literature. Postmodernism operates in a highly competitive, consumer-driven, and technology-based context, mass-mediated industries or cultures. Postmodernism resists the idea of boundaries between high and low culture. It breaks with the elitism of high modernism and the trauma of the Second World War. The American linguist Noam Chomsky emphasized the irrelevance of postmodernism for analysis or empirical knowledge. At the heart of postmodern literature lies a sense of fragmentation. Literary postmodernism relies heavily on devious narrators, non-linear plots, and multi-layered characters. Postmodern authors, unlike modernists, are not concerned with the search for meaning in a chaotic world. Postmodern works are open to interpretation. Readers should read between the lines within a cultural perspective. Watch and summarize the instructional video below. Compare and contrast modernism and postmodernism based on the following video lecture. Thank you very much for listening. Blessed be.